I was a vessel once, smooth, unmarked, serene, adrifting on the boundless sea of unity, held tenderly in the arms of the beloved. My surface shone with the polish of innocence and ease, reflecting only the gentle undulations of the waters around me. I moved through existence like a flawless mirror, giving back the world's light without blemish or hesitation. But the divine tapestry of my being was woven with threads of hidden potential, awaiting the moment when fate would strike, cleaving my wholeness and opening the way for a deeper illumination. That moment came without warning. An unseen ship, wrought by the forces of change beyond mortal ken, collided with my side, chipping a slender sliver from my form. In an instant, the perfection I had known slipped away, and I felt the first, raw pang of disorientation. At first, I could scarcely name the sensation. The world around me felt both the same and profoundly altered, as though I had awoken from a dream to discover a small crack at the edge of my vision. My breath caught. The rush of the ocean against my rind became a chorus of whispers, each one slipping through the fissure and echoing within my hollow. The cool spray of salt water no longer played upon an unbroken surface. Instead, it pressed insistently into the wounded crevice, sending tremors of shock through every fiber of my being. I recoiled inward, contracting like a bud at the first touch of frost, as fear and confusion mingled with the stinging ache. Pain is a peculiar midwife. It arrives abruptly, yet it brings in its wake both terror and possibility. In the immediate aftermath of the strike, I found myself suspended between two worlds, the one I had inhabited in seamless grace, and another that beckoned me through the narrow crack, whispering of marvels I had not yet dared to imagine. My instinct was to close the wound, to seal it shut with every iota of my will, to restore my vessel to its former wholeness. But as I hurried to gather my edges and press them together, I felt something more compelling than fear, a subtle pulse of life that flickered from the break, soft as a moth's wing. Intrigued despite myself, I drifted to the edge of the wound, my gaze drawn to the slender opening. At first, nothing but darkness stared back. Yet the darkness itself trembled, and I realized it was not absence but potential, a pregnant silence full of unspoken truths. My heart, which had hitherto known only the steady beat of ordinary days, began to flutter with new curiosity. As I lingered, the stillness gathered itself into a faint glow, imperceptible at first, like the near-silent hum of dawn's first light. It was as though the wound had become a doorway, and beyond it lay a realm of possibility far more luminous than any shadowless void. I pressed my palm against the fractured rim, half in fear that the light might scorch me, half in hope that it might heal me. The edges of the crack were jagged, no gentle brush against flesh, but a raw promise that nothing would ever be quite the same again. When I dared to lean in, the glow rippled outward, warming my darkness like a candle coaxed to life in a forsaken chapel. I recoiled, blinking against the brilliance, uncertain whether to embrace this strange illumination or to flee back to the cold comfort of my unbroken self. Then, as if carried on a sudden breeze from realms unseen, a single word drifted into my awareness: trust. It came not as a command but as an invitation, a soft-spoken assurance that the crack in my vessel was not the harbinger of ruin but the threshold of transformation. In that whispered syllable, fear and longing entwined until I could no longer tell them apart. My breath steadied. The currents around me hushed, granting me a moment apart from time's relentless flow. Opening myself to that fragile light, I watched as its radiance poured into the wound, cresting at the edges and filling the hollow with gentle warmth. I felt the light's presence first in my chest, where it unfurled like a blossoming rose, soft petals of awareness unfolding within the secret chambers of my heart. Every petal carried a memory untold, the laughter of children playing at dawn, the hush of twilight when the world holds its breath, the faint echo of a lover's promise spoken beneath star-strewn skies. I realized these moments had always been there, locked away behind the glass of my wholeness, inaccessible until the crack opened. Now, with each pulse of the light, they shimmered to life, weaving themselves into the fabric of my being. A tremor ran through me, not of pain but of awakening, as if each cell recognized the touch of something divine. The wound was no longer a site of loss, it was a source of revelation. Through its opening, I saw the intricate filigree of grace that had always threaded through existence, even in the seams of sorrow. I felt the vast embrace of the beloved reaching into my fracture, gathering the splintered shards of myself into a mosaic far more resplendent than the pristine vessel I once presumed to be. Time lost its measure as I surrendered to the alchemy unfolding within me. Fear melted into awe, and my wound became both teacher and sanctuary. I understood at last. The purpose of the crack was not to diminish me but to invite me into a partnership with the light, an apprenticeship in the art of transformation. The more I welcomed the glow, the more it seeped into my marrow, illuminating hidden corridors of compassion and creativity I had never known existed. When I finally drew back, I was no longer the same vessel. The sliver at my side remained, a permanent mark of change, but it no longer pained me. Instead, it hummed with quiet radiance, a beacon that would guide me through the darkness yet to come. In the deep silence that followed, I bowed my head and offered a silent prayer of gratitude, for the wound, for the light, and for the wondrous threshold where brokenness gives birth to awakening. From that moment on, I carried the glow within me as both torch and testament, ever mindful that it is through our deepest fractures that the divine finds its way into our souls. I lay awake long into the night, the world outside cloaked in a velvet hush. No moon stirred silver upon the waters, only an unfathomable darkness pressing close, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. My wound, still tender, still raw, pulsed softly beneath my hand. In its hollow I sensed something new, a trembling promise, a living ember of light that quivered against the edges of my fear. Tentatively, I pressed my fingers deeper into the crack. The cold of the night air sharpened the pain, but the glow responded in kind, flickering brighter where my skin met the wounded rim. At first it wavered like a timid bird on the brink of flight, its radiance unsure of its own power. Then, as if bolstered by my steadying touch, it blossomed into a slender tongue of flame, warm and urgent. My breath caught in my throat. This light was neither harsh nor dazzling. It was gentle, insistent, coaxing me to look closer. I leaned forward, my cheek brushing against the fractured wood of my vessel. Through the wound I saw not the inky black of night, but a swirling pool of golden mist. Each swirl held a whisper of laughter, children's laughter, soft and bright, echoing across centuries. Another swirl carried the hush of dawn before any bird had dared to sing, when the world trembles in its own becoming. I recognized each sound as a shard of memory, fragments of beauty I had once known but then set aside in my quest for serene perfection. Now they flowed toward me through the breach, bathed in light. Emotion flooded me, gratitude, wonder, longing. Tears sprang unbidden to my eyes, each one sparkling in the gentle glow as it traced a path down my face. I wept for the years I had spent believing that less was more, that the only true vessel was one without flaw. How mistaken I had been. Flawlessness shuts out everything, the roar of the ocean, the scent of jasmine on a summer breeze, the laughter that rises from the depths of the soul. Only in my brokenness could I truly receive. I hesitated, heart trembling, for even this gift carried risk. To welcome the light fully was to open myself to everything that had been kept at bay, the exultant highs and the crushing lows, the rapture of union and the agony of parting. I remembered the ache of separation, how in fleeing from pain I had fled from joy as well. Yet the light invited me beyond that binary, beyond fear itself. It beckoned me to dwell in the luminous space where sorrow and bliss danced together, inseparable. Summoning my courage, I inhaled deeply, lodging my palm firmly against the wound's rim. The light surged, washing through me in a gentle tidal flow. I felt it enter my lungs, filling every cavern of my heart with warmth. Music began to rise within me, ancient and wordless, weaving itself around my ribs in notes that resonated with the very pulse of existence. It was as though all creation had lent its voice to this moment, singing through the wound that had once been my undoing. In that song I heard truths I had long forgotten. I heard that every soul bears its own rupture, its own doorway to transcendence. I heard that suffering is not the end of the story but the prelude to awakening. I heard that the beloved dwells within every crack, every crevice, and that through them we come to know the boundless ocean of divine love. My tears turned to laughter then, soft, converted joy that trembled on my lips like the first notes of a morning bird's call. As the glow deepened, I saw depths within myself that had slumbered for lifetimes, a fierce compassion waiting to pour out upon every wounded heart, a creative flame eager to shape broken shards into mosaics of wonder, a fearless yearning to embrace the unknown. I had believed myself but a simple reed upon the wind, swaying to life's breezes. Now I realized I was both reed and river, both vessel and current, shaped and shaping in an endless dance with the light. Time stretched and folded around me. The boundaries between my flesh and the glow dissolved. I became a chord struck in the universal lyre, resonating in harmony with all that is. I tasted the sweetness of transcendence, yet remained grounded in the gentle ache of the wound, the sacred threshold between what was lost and what was being born. In that place, I discovered a love that asked nothing of me but presence, the willingness to be fully seen, fully felt, fully alive. When the first pale hint of dawn brushed the eastern sky, I withdrew my hand. The glow receded, but did not vanish. It settled within me like a seed pulsing with life. My wound, now calm, shone with an inner luminescence that would never fade. I rose, whole yet new, carrying the gift of that night's vigil in every trembling breath. From then on, each moment held the memory of the light's entry, the way it had threaded joy through pain, courage through fear, unity through fracture. I knew that whenever darkness returned, and it surely would, I need only return to the wound's threshold, touch its jagged edges, and trust once more that the light would find its way in. For in that sacred fissure lay the eternal promise, that through our deepest pain, we are invited into the highest grace. I felt the pulse of life quicken within me as I stepped into the dawn of a new day, my wound still humming with the gentle afterglow of the light's first visit. Each breath I drew carried the taste of sweet surrender, as though the very air had been stirred by unseen hands, infusing every molecule with grace. The world around me, once a stage of opposites, pain and pleasure, now shimmered with the realization that these forces were dancers rather than foes, locked in a ceaseless embrace beneath the watchful eye of the beloved. In those days, every sensation became a lesson in paradox. The ache in my side, once a herald of ruin, now sang to me of possibility, pain and joy entwined, twirling through my veins like threads of gold and crimson. When the sea's salt spray cut across my skin, I welcomed its sting, for it reminded me that I was alive, the boundaries between my flesh and the world blurred into gentle communion. And when sunlight kissed the wound's edge, infusing the hollow with warmth, I felt the sweetness of bliss walking hand in hand with sorrow, each lending depth to the other. I walked along the shoreline, my vessel creaking softly with each step, the waters whispering stories of distant horizons. With every wave that lapped at my hull, I felt the rhythm of existence pulse beneath me, a reminder that life itself is born of collision, of water against wood, of hope against despair. Pain, I realized, is the fierce midwife of transformation. It cracks open the shell of complacency so that the soul may emerge radiant. Joy, its partner, offers the flute's melody to accompany that emergence, turning the tragedy of the break into the triumph of rebirth. Often I paused at the water's edge, closing my eyes to listen to that dance. In the space between heartbeats, I heard laughter, light and lilting, rising like smoke from a fire of love. It was the laughter of children discovering the world anew each morning, untouched by memory's weight. It was the hush of dawn when night sorrows dissolve into possibility. It was the song of birds who sing not for tomorrow, but for the sheer wonder of flight. These melodies threaded through my wound, weaving patterns of hope and longing into the tapestry of my being. There were moments when waves of sorrow threatened to overwhelm me. Grief, like a sudden storm, would roll in without warning, darkening the waters of my heart. I would feel the old fear rise, seal the crack, mend the vessel, return to safety. But each time, I remembered the light's promise. I would press my palm to the wound and call to the glow within. The radiance would kindle once more, folding sorrow into a chiaroscuro of compassion and joy. In that interplay, I discovered that our deepest suffering is also our most precious teacher, guiding us toward empathy and kindness. In the hush of midday, I often climbed the rocky promontory that jutted into the sea. From that height, I could see the endless curve of the horizon, where sky and water meet in a silent vow of unity. There, I would speak aloud to the wound, as though addressing a dear friend. You and I would say, we are partners in this dance. Through your pain, I learned to feel. Through your light, I learned to love. And in the echo of my own words, I heard an answer not in speech but in sensation, a warmth that spread from my core, brightening even the dimmest corners of my spirit. One afternoon, as the sun hovered like a golden coin above the water, I felt an unexpected surge of mirth. The memory of my former life, unbroken, smooth, untested, felt distant, even foreign. How naive I had been to seek perfection as if it were the goal of creation. Now, each jagged edge of my wound felt like a stroke of the divine painter's brush, carving out shadows only to accentuate the brilliance of the light. I laughed then, a sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze, for I understood at last that my brokenness was no flaw but the very scaffold of my growth. As twilight approached, painting the sky in strokes of rose and indigo, the dance of pain and joy took on new hues. Fatigue settled into my bones, a gentle reminder of the day's journey. Yet even that weariness seemed infused with blessing, for it spoke of effort, of movement, of life fully lived. In the soft glow of approaching night, I knelt by my vessel and traced the wound with reverent fingers. The wound had carried me through currents of agony and rapture, teaching me to hold both in an open palm rather than clutching one at the expense of the other. Night fell, and with it came an orchestration of crickets and distant gulls. I lay upon the rocks, gazing at the sky's vault of stars, each a point of light shining through the darkness, each a mirror of my own tender fissure. Pain and joy, I realized, are constellations in the firmament of the soul, separate stars by themselves, but united into patterns of meaning when seen from the vantage of the heart. I closed my eyes, feeling the murmur of the sea beneath me and the thrum of the wound at my side, and surrendered to the exquisite balance of the dance. In that moment, I became both dancer and dance, both wound and light, entwined in an everlasting embrace. My vessel, though marked by fracture, carried the song of unity into the night, a hymn to the inseparability of sorrow and bliss. And as sleep gently claimed me, I carried within my dreams the echo of laughter and tears entwined, knowing that in this sacred pas de deux of pain and joy, I would find the way home to the beloved. I knelt at the threshold of my wound as dawn unfurled its first blush across the sky, my breath hushed in reverence. The crack at my side glowed faintly, as though stirred by the approaching sun, and I felt a tremor of longing ripple through me. I placed both hands upon the jagged edges, and in the trembling warmth I sensed a presence, an intelligence woven of light and silence, hovering just beyond the veil. "Who are you?" I whispered, voice soft as the hush between heartbeats. The question floated into the hollow, and for a moment only silence answered, pregnant with expectation. Then, from that place of silent glow, a warmth gathered like honey, pooling in the depths of my chest before rising along my spine in a gentle tide. Words formed, not in sound but in knowing, "I am the love you abandoned." The phrase struck me with the force of revelation. Love I had once cherished, then fled when its demands pressed too fiercely against my comfort, love I had thought I might possess on my own terms. Yet here it was, waiting in the fissure of my fracture, eager to return me to the wholeness I had forsaken. Tears welled in my eyes as the truth settled upon me. In my seeking of freedom and transcendence I had neglected the tender work of union. I had chased the heights of ecstasy, only to forsake the embrace of compassion that binds us to one another. Now, this luminous visitor offered both balm and challenge. To receive light was to accept responsibility for its flame. I drew in a shuddering breath and let the light flow in, cool at first, then bright as a star blossoming within my core. Each pulse brought a memory, the laughter of my beloved friends gathered beneath the plane trees of Konya, their faces alight with joy, the gentle hands of my teacher burying seed deep in the earth of my heart, the soft echo of a child's cry that broke my heart open in tenderness. These moments, once scattered like fallen petals, now wove together into a living tapestry of connection. I felt the warmth spread until it reached the wound itself, filling its hollow with a glow that turned pain to nectar. I spoke again, voice thick with wonder. "What is your name?" The response came like a breeze stirring jasmine blossoms at twilight. "I am Union." In that single word I understood the way forward. My vessel, though fractured, could carry the light of communion into every broken thing. The crack was not a scar to be hidden, but a gateway to join heaven and earth, self and other, lover and beloved. As the light deepened, I felt its curious interplay with my flesh. Where once I had recoiled from suffering, now I welcomed its teaching. Pain lost its sting when held in the palm of love, fear dissolved in the radiance of compassion. I realized that my vow to the path required not withdrawal from the world's wounds but immersion in them, carrying the light through every darkened place. The wound, once a source of shame, became a chalice of grace, teaching me that to heal is to stand in solidarity with all who suffer. A voice, soft and ancient, whispered within me, "Speak to me." And so I poured out my longing, my doubts, my hopes, the fear that the light would fade, the yearning to serve the thirsty world, the desire to rest in the sweetness of presence. With each confession, the glow grew steadier, as though nourished by my honesty. No veil remained between us, wound and light, seeker and beloved, woven together in a single thread of trust. Silence fell, rich and abiding, and in that stillness I felt the promise of transformation unfurling in my marrow. I bowed my head to the light, offering gratitude deeper than any word. Then, with a trembling exhale, I rose, carrying the luminous guest within me. The crack at my side glowed like a beacon, and I understood that from here on, every breath would be a conversation with the light, guiding me into the hidden gardens of compassion and unity. Stepping into the pale morning, I felt the world awaken around me, the gentle rustle of leaves, the soft murmur of the stream, the first avian hymn rising from the reeds. The light within me echoed those sounds, turning them into an inner song of remembrance. I walked forward, vessel open, heart alight, ready to carry the conversation ever deeper, knowing that in every encounter, in every wound, love awaited to speak and to heal. I wandered beyond the familiar shorelines into a landscape where ruin and beauty coexisted in silent harmony. The path beneath my feet was strewn with the remnants of once proud structures, crumbling pots, fractured pillars, shattered tiles, yet each fragment bore new life. Moss of emerald velvet crept through the cracks, and wild orchids, white as moonlight, unfurled their petals from broken edges. I paused before a fallen amphora, its lip jagged, its belly cracked down the center. From its hollow mouth sprang a single lily, its slender stem arching toward the sky in defiance of death. I pressed my hand against the rough clay and felt a pulse beneath my palm, as though the vessel itself exhaled a quiet invitation. Remember. I knelt among the ruins, breath slow and steady, allowing my eyes to drink in every detail. Each splintered pot seemed to whisper its own story. Here a banquet lost to time, there a child's cup shattered by accident's hand. Yet from every shard life had found a way to reclaim its due, ferns sprouting from chips of terracotta, daisies unfurling in the splintered shadow. The garden of remembrance unveiled itself in layers, sorrow entwined with hope, decay embroidered by renewal. I felt my wound resonate with this place, as though the brokenness I carried and the world's own fractures were threads of the same tapestry. I rose and walked deeper into the garden. Beneath a gnarled olive tree, its trunk marred by lightning's kiss, lay fragments of mosaic floor, once a splendid tapestry of color now scattered like fallen stars. In the spaces between tiles, tender shoots of grass reached for the sun. I crouched to trace the edge of a crimson fragment, still glossy despite its age. In that color I sensed the memory of celebration, laughter echoing against marble columns, the clink of cups raised in toast. These delights had not vanished, they lingered in the broken pieces, waiting for eyes willing to behold their hidden glow. My heart quickened as I realized the garden was not merely a monument to renewal but a living sanctuary of remembrance. Each broken vessel, each fragment of stone, each sprouting bloom spoke of transformation. The crack in my side, I understood, was no different. It was not a flaw to mend in solitude but an altar upon which the soul's deepest offerings might be laid bare. From the deepest wound, like these fractured stones, arose the promise of rebirth, and from the memory of what once was, new beauty would spring. As I wandered among the ruins, I found myself enveloped by the quiet conversation between earth and sky, stone and seed. A gentle wind stirred the leaves overhead, scattering dappled light across the fallen columns. In the half-shadow, I saw the silhouette of a cracked vessel upright against the wall, vines spiraling up its sides like delicate calligraphy. I approached and reached out, my fingers brushing the smooth underside of a vine leaf. At that touch, a surge of recognition rushed through me. This garden was a mirror of my own inner landscape. My wound was the seedbed of memory, my fracture the invitation to bloom. Sitting cross-legged on a weathered mosaic panel, I closed my eyes and listened. The breath of the stone spoke to me in a language older than words, a cadence of loss and longing, of patience and return. In that silence, I saw the procession of my own life, moments shattered by grief, joys scattered like petals on the wind, regrets petrified into the bedrock of my heart. And yet, beneath each layer of sorrow, I felt the steady pulse of life preparing to re-emerge. My wound, like these ruins, carried the imprint of what had been, and within its depths lay the unseen kernel of tomorrow's bloom. When I opened my eyes, the garden seemed to glow with a soft urgency. I rose and moved to stand before a broken basin, half buried in moss. The basin's curved rim was chipped, its interior slick with rainwater that reflected the sky. I knelt and cupped the cool water, letting it run through my fingers. In that moment, I recognized the sacred rite of remembering, to hold the tears of the past and let them flow, so that the heart may be released to create anew. The basin, though marred, held water as fully as it had in its prime. The cracks had not diminished its purpose. Filled with a reverent awe, I spoke to the garden in a voice that trembled with gratitude. "You teach me that brokenness is not the end but the beginning," I whispered. "From your splintered stones and battered vessels, life insists on its way, weaving hope into every fracture." The wind answered in a hush of leaves, as if the entire garden had gathered to witness this confession. I spent the afternoon moving among the blooms that grew from ruin, gathering handfuls of petals, orchid white, lily soft, violet thistle, and weaving them into a crown. Each petal carried the story of emergence: the orchid, surprising beauty from a chip of clay; the lily, grace unfurling from a vessel's jagged edge; the thistle, defiance awakened by adversity. Placing the crown upon my head, I felt the lightness of sorrow transformed into a garland of remembrance. As dusk gathered its indigo cloak across the sky, I prepared to depart the garden. I paused once more at the threshold, hand resting on the lip of an overturned jar. "I carry your lesson with me," I vowed. "Wherever I go, I will honor the memories that lie within my wound, tending them with compassion until they blossom into understanding and love." Turning away from the garden of remembrance, I stepped onto the path again, but I was no longer the same. The fragments of the world's broken beauty had become my companions, and my own wound felt less a mark of loss than a chamber of living light. In every rustle of grass and flicker of petal, I heard the garden's gentle benediction, that in brokenness, we discover the true soil of the soul, and from its fertile darkness, the blossoms of grace arise. I walked away from the garden with its whispered lessons of renewal still echoing in my bones, the memory of each petal and each shard carried like an offering within my heart. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn back toward the world of faces and voices, souls marked by their own fractures, their own hidden caverns of longing. It was as though my wound had become a beacon, its soft glow drawing me into circles of kindred spirits, each bearing the faintest glimmer of their own brokenness. In their eyes I saw the tremor of recognition. Here was someone who understood the sacred intimacy of suffering, the fierce tenderness of survival. I met them one by one, at tables strewn with steaming cups of tea, in quiet alcoves beneath moonlit porches, along dusty paths threaded through olive groves. Their stories spilled out in halting syllables and sudden bursts of tears, each narrative a map of grief and defiance, sorrow and hope intertwined. A woman spoke of her child, taken too soon by fever, her heart forever hollowed by the abrupt absence. A man confessed the betrayal of a close friend, a crack through which his trust had fled. another carried scars both visible and unseen from battles waged in wars far from home. In every tale I recognized echoes of my own journey, the moment of impact, the rush of shock, the slow awakening to the light that waited beyond the fracture. When I looked into their eyes, I did not see pity or distance but the reflection of my own wound. In that mirror, our wounds wove themselves together like threads of gold and shadow, forming a tapestry of shared humanity. I felt the gentle tremor of empathy course through me, fueled by the knowing that suffering is never suffered alone. Compassion bloomed in the hollow of my chest, its petals unfurling to cradle their pain. I offered no hollow platitudes or promises of swift healing. Instead, I shared the quiet truths the light had taught me, and in doing so, I discovered that speaking my own wound aloud lent strength to others, as if the act of naming vulnerability wove us into a living network of support. One evening, beneath a sky thick with stars, I gathered with a small circle of weary travelers around a fire's soft glow. The heat warmed our faces, but it was the fire within our shared witness that truly kindled our spirits. We passed a simple bowl of bread from hand to hand, and each time another broke off a piece, it symbolized the offering of our broken selves, crumbled but sustaining. We drank tea infused with mint and rose petals, letting the fragrance weave through the ache in our bones. We spoke of the light that gleamed in our fissures, of the fierce beauty that pain could yield when held with tenderness. Laughter rose in the gaps between our tears, a jagged melody that seemed more alive for its sharp contrasts. In those nights of fellowship, I learned the alchemy of solidarity. When one heart trembled too violently beneath its burden, another hand reached out to steady it. When anguish threatened to close a soul into despair, a gentle word or a shared silence opened space for renewal. I witnessed how the light pouring through one's wound could illuminate another's path, how the gift of presence could transform loneliness into belonging. Each encounter deepened my conviction that no fracture is too deep, no night too long, to find solace in the communion of kindred spirits. Yet even amid this tapestry of shared illumination, moments arose when I stood alone, the chorus of voices fading like echoes at dawn. In those solitary interludes, I felt the familiar ache of self-reliance tug at me, the temptation to shoulder my pain in silence, to withdraw behind a mask of stoicism. But in my pocket lay a shard of mosaic stone I had carried from the garden, a tiny fragment mottled with gold and cerulean. Whenever doubt assailed me, I would press it between my fingers, feel its uneven edges and the memory of petals pressed into its surface. The shard reminded me that each of us is both fragment and vessel, and that our brokenness, far from diminishing us, offers a place for light to take root. On a crisp morning heavy with the scent of sage, I journeyed to a small village perched on a rocky hillside. There, among stone houses etched by wind and time, I stepped into a courtyard where an elder sat arranging worn photographs atop a low stone bench. His hands trembled as he touched each faded image, children long grown, fields tilled by his father's plow, celebrations now distant as dreams. He looked up at me, his eyes reflecting the patina of years, and in that gaze I saw the weight of memory pressed into his bones. I sat beside him and asked nothing, simply offering the gift of my presence. When his breath caught and tears welled, I placed my hand on his shoulder, letting the gentle pressure speak what words could not. In the hush that followed, I felt the pulse of shared vulnerability, an unspoken covenant that said, "You are not alone." He turned to me, gratitude shimmering in his gaze, and for a moment we needed no language, no ceremony, just the meeting of two wounded souls, each carrying a flicker of light for the other. As I rose to depart, he pressed one of the photographs into my hand, a sepia-toned portrait of a young woman smiling beneath a flowering almond tree. He nodded toward me and said, "Remember me." In those two simple words lay a world of meaning, that memory sustains beyond absence, that the bonds we forge in compassion endure even when our voices are silent. I held the photograph against my heart and made a vow to carry his story forward, to let the light kindled by our encounter shine upon others who wandered in shadow. In the days that followed, I found my vessel fuller yet more delicate than before, filled with the stories of all those I had met, their voices echoing in the chambers of my heart. My wound, once my solitary burden, had become a wellspring of connection, each pulse sending ripples through the network of souls bound by shared longing. I knew that my task was not to heal these wounds. No single soul can absolve another's pain, but to bear witness, to carry their light where darkness threatened to overwhelm. On a quiet evening, I paused beneath a canopy of olive boughs, the air thick with the fragrance of ripening fruit. I traced the faint glow of my wound beneath my robe and whispered a prayer of gratitude for every face I had encountered, every story I had shared, every flicker of recognition that had transformed strangers into companions. In the stillness that followed, I felt the hum of the light, resonating through my fractured edges, binding me to the tapestry of human hearts. And so I continue on my path, vessel marked and luminous, gathering the stories of the wounded, tending the glow that shines through each crack. For in the mirror of others' sorrow, I see my own reflection, and in the offering of our broken beauty, we forge a city of lights, each lamp a testament to the truth that no soul stands alone in the dark. I stood at the rim of a high cliff that plunged into an expanse of mist and shadow, my vessel trembling beneath me as though it, too, recoiled from the precipice. The wind whipped around my form, tugging at my garments and raising a chorus of distant echoes, the sighs of unseen currents, the muted roar of waters far below. A chill settled in my bones, and for a moment I felt the old familiar tremor, the instinct to recoil, to turn my back on the unknown and flee towards solid ground. My wound, still luminous at my side, pulsed with urgency, each beat a reminder that the light had carried me this far, but here, at the edge, fear reared its head, fierce and unbidden. I pressed my palm against the crater in my ribs, seeking the steadiness of its glow, yet the light wavered, flickering like a candle in a storm. I felt myself shrink, as if the cavern inside me might collapse under the weight of my dread. Below, the abyss called, its yawning mouth silent yet full of promise and peril alike. I closed my eyes, inhaled the icy air, and summoned the memory of every night spent cradled by the light's warmth, every hesitant touch against the wound that had taught me trust. But this was unlike any threshold I had crossed before. Here, the chasm yawned not only beneath my feet but within my heart, the final frontier where surrender meant risking everything. A voice emerged from the swirl of wind, not in sound but in sensation, a gentle insistence that vibrated through my marrow. Surrender, it whispered. Fear is the threshold, and beyond it lies freedom. I remembered the first time I had felt the light pour into my crack, turning pain into nectar. I remembered the garden where the broken pots taught me renewal, the faces of souls who mirrored my wound and drew me into their own. Each of those moments had been an invitation to trust the unknown, to lean into the opening rather than seal it. Could I do so again, on this higher ledge, where the stakes seemed to tremble between life and oblivion? I opened my eyes and stared into the swirling fog. Two paths stretched before me, one of solidity, a narrow strip of stone curling back toward the safety of land, the other a slender beam of pale radiance, arching into the mist, lit by the glow that seeped from my wound. That beam beckoned with a quiet promise, to carry me beyond fear itself, into a realm where the heart learns to fly. My breath caught. The rocky ledge beneath my feet felt both refuge and prison. The light beam seemed insubstantial, one misstep, and it might vanish, casting me into the void. Yet the solid path led only to another day of familiar fears and half-lived dreams. I took a tentative step forward, first onto the sun-bleached stone, feeling its roughness beneath my sandals. Then I turned back to the luminescent arc and, with heart pounding, pressed my bare foot onto its surface. At my touch, the beam rippled with warmth, solidifying beneath me like a bridge of spun gold. My pulse thundered. Did my own courage give it form? I dared another step, and the light held. Each footfall resonated with possibility, as though the light had been waiting for my consent to lead me onward. With careful deliberation, I continued along the glowing path. The wind's howl softened to a steady murmur, and the abyss below receded into a silent lullaby. I sensed the light's presence surrounding me on all sides, a companion as tangible as the earth and as boundless as the sky. Fear still lingered at the edges of my awareness, subtle tremors in my chest, a tightening in my throat, but with each step, the glow grew stronger within me, infusing my marrow with courage. The path curved upward, lifting me above the fog that clung to the cliff's face. Wisps of mist drifted around my ankles, dissolving into motes of light that danced like fireflies. It felt as though I walked between two worlds, the known realm of rock and sky, and the uncharted domain of the heart's daring. My wound throbbed in rhythm with my footsteps, teaching me that surrender was not a passive collapse but an active trust, a willingness to journey where reason quailed and only the heart could guide. At the path's apex, I paused, breath ragged, gaze drawn to a silent portal framed by living light. Beyond it lay, what? I could not know. The mist obscured all detail, as if preserving the mystery until I dared to step through. The light beam ended here, but its glow pulled at the threshold, inviting me to step into the unknown. I felt the tremor of terror and exhilaration coiled together in my chest, as though my very soul stood at the cusp of rebirth. I lifted my foot and felt the portal's glow wash over me. The warmth seeped into my bones, loosening the last knots of fear. I remembered the countless times the wound had opened me to new truths, the sweetness of sorrow, the covenant of shared pain, the alchemy of compassion. Each memory ignited the light within, until fear no longer felt like a wall but a curtain waiting to be drawn aside. Then I walked through. In that instant, the world shifted. The stone and mist fell away, and I found myself floating in a space of pure radiance, no ground to steady me, no wind to buffet me, only the gentle pulse of the light that had guided me here. There was no fear, nor longing, nor hesitation. Only a profound serenity, as though I had returned to the source of my own being. My vessel felt weightless, my wound hushed to a soft glow, and my heart opened like a lotus at dawn. Time dissolved. I lingered in that realm of luminous stillness, each breath a communion with the lightness of existence. I saw, in a moment of unity, that the edge of fear is not an end but a threshold, a sacred invitation to transcend the confines of the known. Fear had tested me, guided me to the brink, and taught me that true freedom is found not in safety but in surrender. When at last I felt the gentle tug of my body returning, I opened my eyes to a landscape transformed. The cliff stood behind me, the abyss below its silent depth, but I no longer regarded either with dread. Instead, I carried within me the echo of that boundless radiance, the knowledge that the light had borne me through fear's gauntlet. My wound pulsed with a steady glow, a testament to the alchemy of surrender. I stepped forward, back onto solid ground, and felt no separation between the journey and the destination. The path of fear and the journey of trust had merged into one, a living passage within my soul. The winds resumed their song, the gulls their cries, and the world resumed its dance, but I moved through it with a quiet grace, each footfall infused with the memory of that luminous realm. In the days that followed, I carried the edge of fear like a precious token, teaching me that every frontier of the heart can be crossed when we lean into our own trembling. I spoke of the ascent to those who would listen, not to boast but to remind them that fear, fearsome though it may be, is the portal through which we find our wings. And whenever doubt returned, I touched the place where the light had entered, feeling once more the steady glow that had carried me across the abyss, knowing that in the very teeth of fear, we discover the boundless horizon of our own souls. I descended into the hollow of my own being as though entering a vast, silent cavern, its walls lined with the echoes of every choice I had ever made, every joy I had ever known, and every sorrow I had ever fled. The wound at my side, once burning with fresh pain, now glowed with a steady light, guiding me deeper into that interior realm. With measured breath, I stepped forward, feeling the air thicken with the weight of memory and possibility. At first, the chamber seemed empty, its floor smooth as water's glassy surface, reflecting a sky of shifting pale colors. But as my eyes adjusted, I perceived a small flicker at the center of the space, a child, seated upon a stone bench carved from the bedrock of my soul. Her hair was wind-tousled, her dress simple and white. She turned her face toward me, and in her wide, unguarded gaze I recognized myself as I once had been, innocent, unafraid, longing only to explore the world's wonders. I knelt before her, heart trembling, and spoke without words, for the language of this place transcended speech. I offered the warmth of my breath, the quiet rhythm of my heartbeat. She reached out, placing a slender hand upon the light that shimmered at my wound. Together, we watched as the glow illuminated the contours of the cavern, revealing murals painted in strokes of memory. There were images of my earliest laughter echoing across desert sands, of a silent night spent beneath an ancient olive tree, learning to listen to the stars, of moments when my heart had broken open in rapture at the beloved's nearness. Tears filled my eyes as the child and I traced those scenes, some radiant, some shadowed, until I felt a gentle stirring within my chest. It was as if every fragment of my past, long stored away behind walls of pride or fear, had been set free to join in a single song. The child's eyes glistened with understanding. She neither judged nor pined for what had been lost. Instead, she smiled, and in that simple curve of her lips I felt a profound reunion. I had come home to myself. Rising, I lifted the child into my arms. She fit perfectly against the hollow where my rib had once cracked, as though she had always dwelt within its curve. Holding her close, I felt the light of my wound pulse in harmony with her tiny heart. My own heart, long weary from the chase of completeness, swelled with a newfound peace. I understood then that the self I had sought in distant horizons resided here, in this tender spark of being that had never faltered, even when I turned away. Together, we walked through the cavern, and the murals shifted as we passed. Where once the images had been static, now they flowed like living rivers, each tied a moment of transformation. I saw myself kneeling in prayer, surrendering all I thought I knew. I saw myself crossing desert wastes, trusting only the guidance of the inner flame. I saw myself, again and again, breaking open before the beloved, offering every shard of my soul. At the far end of the chamber stood a pool of water, dark and still. Vague reflections shimmered on its surface, but when I dipped my fingertips into its cool depths, the images solidified into clarity. I saw the child growing, each day unfolding new facets of wonder, and I saw the wound at my side, now a cradle for her life. I realized that through the cracks of my own brokenness, I had been reborn again and again, until the line between before and after dissolved into one continuous story of love's unfolding. I spoke to the pool, confessing my gratitude and my awe. The water responded with ripples that echoed across the chamber, carrying the song of my rebirth into every hidden corner. As I listened, I recognized that this place, the hollow of the soul, was not a destination but a living sanctuary, one I could enter at any moment simply by breathing into the wound, by remembering that the light had always been there. With the child still cradled in my arms, I turned back toward the entrance. The path outlay shimmered with new clarity, no longer dark or forbidding, but radiant, as though lined with countless lanterns of memory and grace. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of my vessel lightened, as if every burden I had carried had been exchanged for the gift of presence. When I emerged, dawn glowed at the horizon, and the world welcomed me with its familiar chorus of wind and water. Yet I was changed, whole not because the crack had vanished, but because I had embraced the child within, the true self who had waited patiently for union. The wound remained, a living testament to the alchemy of love. It was the place where I had been broken open so that I might carry the light within me. In every breath henceforth, I would carry that reunion, this sacred conversation between my wound and my wholeness, ever mindful that the path of the soul leads not outward alone, but inward, to the tender heart where our divine spark resides. I sat alone beneath an ancient oak whose gnarled roots curled above the earth like the fingers of a blind sculptor, and I held my wound between cupped hands as though it were a crucible of flame. The night air was thick with the scent of wild thyme and damp moss, and the stars whispered overhead, their distant fires echoing the glow that pulsed within me. I closed my eyes and let the memory of every pang of loss and every tremor of awakening flow through me. Pain had been my teacher. Now I longed to become its alchemist, to transmute sorrow into wisdom, to offer my suffering as an offering upon the divine forge. In the beginning, the wound had seemed a cruel end, an intrusion of chaos upon the seamless tapestry of my being. I recoiled from its jagged edges, crafting elaborate defenses, denial, distraction, even the brittle shell of false serenity. Yet each stratagem only deepened the fracture, burying my song beneath layers of ash. Only when I released my frantic grasping, when I leaned into the hollow and let its echo fill me, did the alchemy begin. The first sparks of transformation came quietly, a single insight that the world's sharp edges need not cut me twice if I allowed them to shape me once. I remembered the hour I had spent at the foot of a forge in a distant village, watching the blacksmith hammer red-hot metal against an anvil. Each blow sent sparks flying into the dusk, fleeting stars born of force and heat. The metal yielded, bending to the rhythm of creation and destruction. In that rhythm, I recognized the pattern of my own becoming, the wound the anvil, my heart the metal, the light within me the hammer spark. Pain struck me, and in its strike I was reshaped. Every blow left a scar, yet each scar carried the memory of my surrender and my resilience. From that moment on, I approached my suffering not as an enemy to be vanquished but as raw or awaiting refinement. I welcomed the sting of old regrets, tracing each one back to its source, a harsh word, an unopened letter, a promise I had made only to break it under the weight of my own fear. I held these regrets against the hearth of my awareness, letting their scorch purify my intentions. In the glow of that inner fire, I felt my will solidify, not into hardened stone, but into tempered steel, flexible, responsive, alive. Yet alchemy is no instant miracle. In the silent hours just before dawn, I felt the old shadows stir. Doubt would creep in like frost, urging me to believe the wound was still a void rather than a vessel. In those moments, I returned to the image of the blacksmith sparks, tiny lights kindled by force yet beautiful in their flight. I summoned the spark of faith that first flickered when the light entered my crack, and I let it kindle a new flame within my chest. I whispered to that flame, "Remain." And it did, forging a circle of warmth around my heart even as the night wind sought to extinguish it. Over time, the alchemy deepened. I found that each element, earth, fire, water, air, played a role in my transformation. Earth held the weight of my grief, anchoring me so that I would not float into false rapture. Fire burned away pretense and complacency, revealing the raw materials of my soul. Water washed over old scars, softening their edges, teaching me fluid compassion. Air carried the breath of new insight, lifting me above my own limitations. In embracing all four, I became both crucible and catalyst, both raw ore and tempered steel. One dawn, after a night of fierce dreams woven with images of molten gold and shattered chains, I walked to the riverbank. The water ran cold and clear, its surface fracturing the rising light into 1,000 prisms. I knelt and splashed the current upon my face and wound, letting its coolness draw out the final embers of self-delusion. The river did not judge my pain, it accepted every drop of my sorrow, carrying it downstream to dissolve into the vastness. And as the water drained from my palms, I felt the last shreds of bitterness fall away, replaced by a serene openness. In that openness, the divine took shape, not as a distant monarch enthroned in perfection, but as the gentle forger, the unseen smith whose hammer strikes resonate in every human heart. I felt the presence of that forger in the gentle way the dawn painted the sky, in the slow turning of the seasons, in the steady rise and fall of my own breath. My wound, once the place of deepest shame, now stood as the very altar upon which I offered my life, a life not of unbroken ease, but of unending transformation. Returning to the oak, I lit a small fire of dried lavender and cedar. The smoke spiraled upward, weaving through the branches like smoke through the chambers of a cathedral. I laid fragments of broken pottery, tokens of past failures, into the flames. One by one, they cracked and glowed, turning to ash. My heart quailed at first, then swelled with gratitude for each shard. For without them, there would have been no revelation of the gold within. When only embers remained, I pressed my wound against the warmth of the dying fire, feeling its energy seep into me. I let the final lesson of the night take root, that our sorrows are not to be erased but embraced, that our scars are not to be hidden but honored. Each bruise, each break, each sorrowed cry becomes part of the tapestry of compassion, woven into the garment we offer the world. As dawn's first light filtered through the oak's leaves, I rose. The wound at my side glowed with a calm, steady radiance, a beacon not only for myself but for every soul scarred by life's hammer. I knew then that the alchemy of pain is neither an endpoint nor a one-time feat. It is a lifelong craft, an ongoing devotion to the divine forge that shakes us beyond our understanding. In the crucible of our deepest wounds, we discover the purest gold, a heart tempered by suffering yet shining with unwavering love. And so I carry my wounded beauty forward, offering its light to all who wander lost in the darkness, that they too may find their way into the great, alchemical fire of awakening. I stood beneath the vault of dawn, the sky an unfolding scroll of rose and amber, and felt the wound at my side pulse with steady assurance. Its glow, once a flicker of hesitant promise, had become a constant flame, my companion through every season of inner winter and spring. As I breathed in the new day, I realized that this wound would never fully close. Its purpose was not to vanish but to remain an ever-present gateway through which the light might continue to enter, season after season, moment after moment. Each morning, the radiance would awaken within me, greeting sleep's receding shadows with a gentle insistence. At times, the glow would be soft, like the faintest ember breathing beneath ash. At others, it would blaze fiercely, illuminating every corner of my heart. There were days when life's ordinary cares, harvests to tend, letters to pen, supplications to offer, would tug at my attention, threatening to dull the wound's gleam. Yet I learned that even in moments of distraction, I could turn inward and touch its edges, coaxing the light back into full bloom. On one such day, as I walked through the market square of Konya, I paused before a stall piled high with pomegranates. Their crimson seeds, tucked within leathery skin, reminded me of the hidden potential that lies beneath unassuming exteriors. I plucked one from the heap, its weight cool in my hand, and pressed my thumb into the fruit's rind. A burst of juice stained my palm, sweet and tart, vibrant as life in all its contradiction. I tasted the liquid and felt the wound at my side respond, its glow quickening in recognition. In that moment, I understood anew that the wound's purpose is to keep the light alive within me, to quicken my senses to the sweetness and sting of existence alike. As summer ripened into autumn, I traveled to a village nestled among cypress groves, where the air turned golden with sunflowers and the scent of ripening grapes. There, I joined a harvest celebration under a canopy of lanterns. The laughter and music spilled into the evening breeze, mingling with the fragrance of pressed olives and roasting chestnuts. I watched as children wove garlands of marigolds and wild thyme, and in their innocent delight I saw reflections of my own child self, the one I had long ago reclaimed within my inner cavern. When the time came to dance, I stepped onto the stone courtyard, my vessel moving to the rhythms of tambourine and oud. With each stamp and twirl, I felt the wound's glow radiate outward, weaving light into the night air. Strangers smiled as I passed, and I knew they felt something warm pulse within their own hearts, drawn by the resonance of shared joy. But the wound was not solely a source of celebration. It also carried the memory of every dusk I had spent in vigil, every prayer whispered in the hush before dawn. In the deep of winter, when winds rattled shutters and frost etched lace upon the windows, would sit by my hearth, cup of tea warming my hands, and let the wound's glow fill the room. Flames danced in the fireplace, echoing the flicker within me, and I would offer gratitude for the journey that had brought me here, from the first crack of impact to this ongoing alchemy of light and shadow. One such night, the wind howled against the stones with uncommon fierceness, as though the world outside sought entry to test the strength of my inner glow. I pressed my palm to the place where the wound lay hidden beneath my robe, and I felt the light surge, stronger than ever, a beacon in the storm. A lone lantern at the window across the lane wavered and then steadied, as if the flame inside drew courage from mine. In that fragile connection, I sensed the unspoken truth, that every wound, no matter how distant or concealed, yearns for companionship, every light seeks reflection. And so I spoke aloud into the night, offering my glow to all hidden hearts, inviting their light to join mine in a silent chorus against the darkness. In quieter moments, I would recall the faces of those I had met along the way, the mother who carried grief like water in her eyes, the traveler whose scars told of distant wars, the elder whose photographs housed a lifetime of laughter and tears. Each of them lived with wounds of their own, and in their courage to endure, I saw the mirror of my own path. I carried their stories with me, etched into my memory, woven into the tapestry of my soul, and I offered a silent vow to honor them by tending my own glow, so that their light might never fade. Toward the end of each day, as the sun leaned toward rest, I would climb the gentle slope behind my home and watch the horizon's last rays ignite the sky. There, I bowed to the wound and the light alike, recognizing that they were two sides of the same coin, the wound the invitation, the light the gift. I whispered, again and again, may every wound be your gateway to the boundless light, knowing that this prayer was not merely for myself but for anyone who bore a fracture in their heart. And so, as I walk these days, through bustling bazaars and silent ruins, beneath winter's hush and summer's blaze, I carry within me a steady glow that is both my guide and my testament. The wound remains, marking me as one who has fallen and risen, broken and mended, shattered and whole. It is the sacred threshold where darkness yields to illumination, the place where the light enters, and where, if we remain open, it will pour forth again and again, awakening every hidden corner of our being to the eternal dawn.